Okay, so one of the descendants of Bharata is King Sudas. He is in a way the most important of the kings during the Vedic period because he greatly extends the Vedic territory. He calls them Anindra, without Indra, Adeva, without the Devas, and Ayajna, without a fire sacrifice. Now this is an exact description not just of any non-Vedic religion, but very specifically of Mazdeism or Zoroastrianism. Vishwamitra is more of a military character who takes part in Sudas's conquest not just by singing prayers, no, by actually conquering. Okay, so we're going to talk about Vishwamitra. It all starts a few generations earlier with King Bharata. He is shown as bringing the fire. He is indeed the founder of the Vedic tradition, known by the fire sacrifice and by a collection of hymns passed on orally. So he's uniquely important. He himself, however, is not the first human being, not at all. He is a descendant of Manu Vaivasvata, of his daughter Ila, of her son Pururavas, who is the founder of the lunar dynasty, so he belongs to the lunar dynasty, and Pururavas' descendants Nahusha, Yayati, and Yayati's son Puru, after whom his tribal provenance is called Paurava. Okay. And then he's the father of Bhumanyu and progenitor of the Bharata dynasty. Okay, so with him starts the Vedic project, 10 mandalas, 10 books, the eldest of which is the 6th. They're not in chronological order. So it starts with the fire cult. The verse that is purposely put first, that is in the first hymn of the first mandala, which is chronologically not the oldest, but purposely put in front by the editor Vedavyasa, starts with Om Agni Mile, I worship the fire. That's what it's all about. But it's interesting also to see what hymn he put at the end. And it's a kind of a kumbaya hymn, you know, let's all get together and nice and friends and so on, namely to gather all the tribes around the sacred fire. Modern neurologists have shown that simply watching the fire, like in Trataka, and sitting together around the fire has a very pacifying effect on the brain. Right. So the Vedic scientists had it all. So, okay. His perhaps adoptive son, Bharadwaja, and the only one who mentions Bharata as having seen him in person, is Bharadwaja. So he's the first sage. And interestingly, so he's the author of the 6th book. He mentions a lot of people in the past, which solves the issue. Many people remonstrate with me when I mention these forefathers. They say, oh, but the Vedas had no past. They were eternal. They were apaurushaya, and they have no history. Well, I disagree. And the rishis themselves disagree. There are many mentions in the Veda where the rishis speak about their own sweat that they spend in working to make those hymns. They pride themselves on offering these hymns to the gods and so on and so on. It's absolutely clear that they are the authors and not the gods. On the contrary, the gods are the recipients. It is like a young man who takes his guitar or whichever instruments you have and goes to the balcony of the girl he loves and starts singing how beautiful she is and how deep her eyes are and so on. Now, of course, the girl does not dictate to him, come on, sing how beautiful I am. Come on, tell me my eyes are as deep as the ocean. Come on. No, of course not. So likewise, the gods don't dictate anything. They are the recipients of the Vedic hymns. Okay, so one of the descendants of Bharata is King Sudas. He is in a way the most important of the kings during the Vedic period because he greatly extends the Vedic territory. So Bharata is already called a Chakravarti, and because the subcontinent is called Bharat, you might think, yes, you see, he was the first king of the subcontinent. That, unfortunately, is not the case. He was in control of a territory about as large as, and this perhaps explains why I ended up coming here, as large as Belgium in northern Haryana. And so Sudas expands it quite a bit. So he offers a Ashwamedha, a horse sacrifice, which is in a way a declaration of war. You see, it states the intention of creating an empire and is therefore a challenge to all the neighboring kings, that either they will have to defend themselves or they should submit. Submit is not to deeply submit. It means they have to pay tribute, but they can keep their own swadharma, their own local customs remain unchanged, but they form part of a larger empire. Now, then he starts to put this into practice. And so he expands his territory to the west, crossing the Satluj or Shutudri river, the western parallel of the Saraswati. Then he sets his sights on the east, on Panchala. And so there a few defeats of enemy kings are mentioned. Not too much detail is given, but we know that a certain Pramagandha is confronted, that the Kikatas are chased from there eastwards to what becomes later Magadha, and he defeats a certain Bheda, about whom otherwise nothing is told. And then the court priest in the employ of Sudas, namely Vishwamitra, known from the Gayatri mantra, actually settles there. And so this is the beginning of a large Paurava settlement on the east of the Yamuna. So initially they're in the Saraswati basin in present-day Haryana. They cross the Satluj to the west, they cross the Yamuna to the east, and take over a large territory there. About the nature of the preceding rulers there, we don't know too much detail. We do know, though, that other sub-tribes of the Pauravas had already settled there. And so it's not at all a conquest of the so-called pre-Aryan aboriginals or something. It's largely an intra-Aryan war. Vishwamitra has found another vocation in life, and Sudas employs a new court priest, Vashishta. And so it's thanks to Vashishta that we have a lot more detail even of the military conduct, but especially about the religious dimension of these wars. He sings to Indra to give them victory in a war on the Parushni riverside against the 10 kings. This is the battle of the 10 kings. Some very pious Hindus say, oh, it's a war of good and evil. Sudas was the good guy and the 10 kings are evil. Well, if you read the story as told in the Rigveda, you don't get that impression. You see, Sudas was a conqueror, was an imperialist. You know, he greatly expanded his domain, and maybe in history that's something that sometimes has to happen. At any rate, the 10 kings had good reason to ally, you know, and to form a defensive alliance against this onslaught. Nevertheless, they lose. Vashishta describes the religion of the opponents, which is quite interesting. So it is not because of the difference in religion that the war takes place, but nevertheless, the others are religiously different, and probably more so because of the war. Let me explain. He calls them Anindra, without Indra, Adeva, without the Devas, and Ayajna, without a fire sacrifice. Now this is an exact description not just of any non-Vedic religion, but very specifically of Mazdeism or Zoroastrianism, which doesn't practice fire sacrifice. Why not? They are also fire worshippers, but unlike the Vedic priests, they don't throw any sacrifices into the fire. They think the fire is so sacred that it should not be polluted with any other element. So they don't pour ghee or milk or so into it. They don't burn corpses in it. That's why they don't have cremation, and so on. They are Adeva because they reject the Devas. Mind you, some people who fulminate against atheism say, oh, they are atheists. No. There are different categories of gods. The Asuras are one of them. My own ancestors called their gods the Aesir, which is the same word. So it means a category of gods. So there are the Devas, there are the Asuras, and then there are other categories, the Vasus, the Adityas, the Maruts, and so on. One of the Devas is Indra. And with Indra, they are particularly piqued. They demonize him. In a way, he's the first ever to become the devil. That's about how they see him. And so why is that? Clearly, there must have been an earlier battle in this war between the Proto-Iranians or Anavas and the Pauravas or the Vedic people. And so both of them worship the same gods. Both of them want to win the battle. They pray to Indra, Indra, please give us victory. And unfortunately, Indra can give victory only to one of them. So they lose the battle. Most people, when they pray to God and they don't get what they want, blame themselves. You know, think, oh my God, I didn't bring the right sacrifices, or I misbehaved, I sinned, or so. Well, you see, the Iranians were made of a different metal. They said, Indra, you don't do what we want. We reject you. We demonize you. Right? So that gives the specific face of the Mazdean religion. Okay, now interestingly, Vashishta has an eye for these religious details. Vishwamitra doesn't. Vishwamitra is more of a military character who takes part in Sudas's conquest, not just by singing prayers, no, by actually conquering. And so it makes sense that thousands of years later in the Puranas, when Hindu society has become a caste society, as opposed to the Vedic age, that Vishwamitra is seen as a Kshatriya, as a Raja, whereas Vashishta is the Brahmana among the two, is the priest among the two. So, in a way, you see, I have a problem with the Puranic writers back projecting the caste category onto the Vedic age. On the other hand, it's not far-fetched, it's not too contrived to call Vishwamitra a Kshatriya. Was there a conflict between those two? The Rigveda mentions nothing of it. Absolutely nothing. It doesn't even say, as many people infer, that Sudas replaces Vishwamitra with Vashishta as his court priest. No, Vishwamitra disappears from the scene, not because he is fired, simply because he finds a new vocation. He wants to participate in the colonization of Panchala. And Vashishta never speaks against Vishwamitra, so there are stories that Vishwamitra organizes the alliance of the 10 kings in order to take revenge on Sudas and so on. This is all pure invention. In the Mahabharata, Vishwamitra steals the wish cow from Vashishta. That is a reapplication of an ancient Indo-European story which you find, for example, in the Irish myth of the cattle raid of Cooley. That's how far the same motives as in Vedic tradition go. Then, okay, so this is an unhistorical variation on a piece of history, because let there be no doubt, Vishwamitra and Vashishta are really historically existing persons, just as Rama, just as Krishna. So, what does it mean in larger Indian history, this crossing of the Yamuna? It means that the Vedic Bharata tribe breaks out of its confines in the Saraswati basin. They're not really the first to do that. You see, even of their own Paurava tribe, there has already been a certain expansion. Then there are the related tribes, the Anavas, the Druhyas, and so on. They all do their part of expansion. So from a fairly limited part of northern India, they conquer most of India. And as for the south, that remains Dravidian, but it gets Vedicized to a large extent, and of their own free will, that there never was a Vedic conquest of South India, except for a conquest of the hearts and minds. The southern kings were so impressed with the new Vedic tradition that they wanted to be part of it. They invited the reciters of the Vedas to bring their families and settle in the agraharas, especially earmarked neighborhoods, and to give the Vedic prestige to their dynasty. Right, so this is an important episode in that process of the Vedicization of India. The Yamuna becomes central, replacing the Saraswati, in the Bharata kingdom, and so it leads to important events like different branches of this tribe cross the Yamuna depending on political situations, making Kurukshetra their capital, making Hastinapura to the east their capital. The encounter of sage Parashara, a descendant of Vishwamitra, of Vashishta, with the fairy girl Satyavati. And so it was love at first sight before they even crossed the river. When they reach an island halfway in the river, they consummate their newfound passion, and the result is Veda Vyasa, the prime sage of them all, the one for whom Guru Purnima is celebrated. So the aftermath is that all of India becomes Vedic, becomes Arya, and so that is why India is called Bharata Varsha, or shorter Bharata, which effectively means Veda land. Thank you.